Welcome to the Yoga Celebrity Podcast. Each week, I bring you the story of a different yoga teacher, their origins, what it was like before they taught yoga, how they got certified, and what it's like now. My hope is that through listening to this podcast or watching it if you're on YouTube or Spotify, you will gain what you need to feel very confident to practice yoga or maybe even become certified. Everyone has a story to share. Some people's story might be like yours, others might not. Take the time to enjoy the diversity that is teaching yoga. If you would like to become a certified yoga teacher, I invite you to check out my private one-on-one instruction online 200-hour and 300-hour yoga teacher trainings. If you're listening to this before January of 2024, I'm also offering a trip to Costa Rica as part of your online certification. Either way, I would love to connect with you. Let's get to the podcast. Welcome to the Yoga Celebrity Podcast. I'm Angelica, also known as Yoga Celebrity on social media, and I'm super excited to be sharing my guest with you today. Sarit Rogers is an incredible person who is sharing her love of yoga with people who have experienced trauma, and she's helping to transform this planet. I'm so glad that she's here today. Welcome to the podcast, Sarit.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. Well, let's just dive right into it. Tell us, what was your life like before you were a yoga teacher?
Ooh, that's a big question. Let's see. I became a yoga teacher in 2013, and prior to that, I'll. What was I doing? Well, I'm a professional photographer, and I was shooting. I was predominantly photographing people. Music actually was my love, and what I spent a lot of time photographing. I had left an abusive marriage that I had been married for over, I think, like 10 years and had a child, and got us out of that pretty horrific situation. And in that process, put myself through photography school.
Oh, wow.
And photography was sort of like, it started out with this kind of, said to a friend of mine, I'm like, let's take this beginning photography class. And it just sparked this deeper memory of when I was little and my dad had a dark room in the house. So there's a long history and a deep love of photography for
That's
me.
real photography too. That's not just on your
Uh,
iPhone. That's real photography.
That is real. Thank you. And when I went to photography school, we were doing all darkroom work, and digital was this thing that was happening, and the teachers were going, well, it's not really going to happen. And we were like, save
Oh,
film. It was kind of reminded me of when LPs went out.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And it was like, save the LP. And then, of course, here we are with, we don't even have CDs anymore. So,
Right.
but LPs are coming back, but that's another conversation. um, there was something about photography that has this beautiful emergence of light and shadow. And it really felt like poetry. And if you really study some of the photographers, like Ruth Bernhard, who's my favorite, she paints with light and shadow. And so that was really meaningful to me. And I was also taking classes at Santa Monica College. And at the time, I was taking this women's studies class. And it was like, I was like knocking out requirements. I take this women's studies class, and I end up becoming friends with Melanie Klein, who's the teacher. She just did a cool TEDx talk,
Oh,
actually. So,
cool.
yeah, it was awesome. And we ended up becoming friends, and I started photographing her and her little one. And then there was a book that she was working on called 21st Century Yoga. And they were looking for a cover photographer. And she was really wanting a photographer who wasn't focused on promoting the yoga body through a male lens, through this like Americanized skinny white girl, and there's nothing wrong with the skinny white girl, but that's not yoga. That doesn't identify yoga. And so um, I started sending in images and ended up doing the cover for that book. And the first chapter of that book was written by Julian Walker. And at the time, I had practiced yoga through my pregnancy. I had stopped practicing yoga because my ex-husband was predatory while I was practicing and would make really gross, suggestive, like, yeah, he was my husband, but it was just like, I'm in down dog. I don't need to hear salacious nonsense. And
Mm-hmm.
it started to feel unsafe, right? And um so I had this like kind of weird relationship with yoga at that point. It felt tainted with me. And then
Mm.
yet I was photographing yogis, and so that and trying to like shift the yoga lens. Because everything I was seeing
Wow.
also didn't look like me either,
What
right? So
juxtaposition in your life.
yeah, it was like total juxtaposition. And so I said to Julian, I'm like, should I take a yoga training? He's like, yeah, why not? I'm like, and at the time I was like, well, maybe they'll just make me a better photographer. But yoga wasn't unfamiliar to me. Like my mom would take me down to Venice Beach. She's actually Santa Monica to Station 26. And we would do sun salutations when I was a little kid, like 7 years old. So it was
Wow.
like it was familiar to me and also not familiar to me in a way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And going to classes always felt I just didn't want to do that because everybody was it was that narrative you always hear. They were super bendy or they were super this or they were super that. And
Right, right. And
I'm
having
this
owned a studio, I know that that's actually not accurate at all.
it is super not accurate, but what was being demonstrated in
Right.
media was like, and here I
Well,
am.
can't
I'm
trust the media for anything.
no,
That's
it's a
for sure.
lie. And as a photographer, I'm going, well, photography is a big fat lie. Like I know that.
Oh.
And part of my stuff was that I wasn't going to make it a lie. I was going to tell you the truth in
Mm-hmm.
my photography. I was going to show exactly what I was seeing, which is actually a beautiful human being who might have a bump or a ridge or not perfect skin, and yet they're beautiful and embodied
Mm-hmm.
and alive. And so that sort of started that for me, like making that decision started the yoga class. And I was studying with Julian Walker and Hala Corey, and the name of the
Oh,
class was
I've taken Hala's trauma class.
yeah, that
Yeah.
it eventually ended up there, and then now I'm leading my own, and so it's I realized like sitting there, I was like, oh yeah, I have no interest in teaching in a studio. I do like teaching, and it was about finding my voice and being able to bring it elsewhere. So that's sort of what led me back into taking yoga, and it was a weird, not yoga, but a yoga teacher training, and really just wanting to check it out, and you know who knows what I'm going to be able to teach. Right, but anyway, I ended up teaching and I love teaching. And
I found that, having certified thousands of people now, that oftentimes it's the people who come in to training who don't want to teach or aren't sure if they want to teach that end up coming out being the best teachers. And the people who went in who have really strong practice and they can do all the crazy things and, they're in handstand scorpion and stuff, that they actually don't enjoy teaching as much because the majority of students, by and far, the
mm-hmm,
vast majority of people who are going to come to your yoga classes
mm-hmm,
are the librarian or the nurse or
mm-hmm,
the school teacher or the administrator or the
yep,
lawyer or the barista or
mm-hmm,
the retail worker who just want to have a chill moment and they are not dedicated to their practice in that way. And so
right,
people who can do all the fancy poses sometimes feel very frustrated when
yeah,
they try to teach classes because no one can do the things that they can do. And people don't have that kind of commitment to the physical side. They want the real benefits of yoga, which is the
right,
mental side, right? In which people like myself
who are not as naturally flexible or have to work really, really hard for flexibility.
Mm.
And if I run for 5 seconds, all of a sudden it's too tight. I can't do a back bend. like, or, like I've struggled with weight my whole life, just is just part of just being a human that for me, like I've thrived at teaching because I understand what my students are going through. I understand
Yeah.
how hard it is to touch your toes, you
Yeah.
know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, to me, it was about teaching to human beings
Right. Right.
and taking the performative nature out of yoga,
Right.
and that the pseudo spirituality, like actually tapping in, and the other, paying attention to, are we actually practicing ahimsa in a practice?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Are
It's
we really
really
a nicer person in a handstand than the person who can only do a low lunge, right? No, not true. Like, I think that we're beautiful human beings having a very human experience.
it's
So,
interesting to me how many people do not practice the yamas and the niyamas.
mhm.
That they
Yeah,
just practice the third limb. That's it. We're gonna practice asana. That's it.
it's all
They
it's
might
about.
throw
Yeah,
a little bit of meditation in there. And
yeah.
I think it's getting in some ways better and in some ways worse with the
Hmm.
advent of Instagram and TikTok. And, there certainly are leaders who look very different.
Yep.
But still by and large, I know because I make my full-time living off of social media, the people that I reach on social media. And by and
Hmm.
large, I'm competing against younger, thinner,
Yeah.
more flexible, way more beautiful women than there's not a lot of people that look like me, which also is a good thing for me, right? Because
It's a good
there's
thing. Yeah.
I'm like 40, I'm in the 45 to 65 range of people and they're
Yeah.
loving my stuff, which is great. But
Well, I mean, yeah, you look at, the world that we live in is so paranoid and scared of aging. Right.
mm-hmm,
And
yeah.
I'm 51. And I was like, I don't have any makeup on today. I'm moisturized. That's all I got for you today. You know?
Your skin looks great. It doesn't matter though. It's like I'm 48 and I'll have people come on the podcast and they'll say because this is on YouTube as well as on the podcast. You can't see us on the podcast, but you can see us on YouTube. But I'll have people say to me "Oh, I don't," they don't want to talk about their age or they're screwed around it. And my mom died when she was 61.
Mm,
It is a
mm,
blessing to be 48. I am
yeah.
blessed to be here. I don't care. I have wisdom now, you
Hmm.
know? Like
Yeah.
when I was young, I've got around really easy on my looks. And now I have wisdom and something to actually share with people that benefits people's lives that isn't just about me.
Right.
So I'm cool with every phase that I've been through.
Yeah.
It was great to be young and beautiful and go out to the clubs and live in Vegas and do all the things. And now, it's great to be older and to be sharing
Yeah.
wisdom with people and to work with sometimes, a lot of the people in my 200-hour teacher training are younger. It's younger
Yep.
women who have never had anyone say, you did a great job. What you're
Yeah.
doing is going to change the world. You're helping people. You have a
Hmm.
light within you.
Yeah.
That was it. That was excellent work. I'm for some people, the very first person that's ever said, you're enough. You're good.
Right. That's
You
a
know?
huge, huge thing to hear.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm cool with that. And if that means I got to be 48, then I guess I do.
Nothing wrong with being 48. 48 is awesome.
48 is awesome.
Yeah.
So,
Indeed.
you take this yoga teacher training and you're working with all these trauma informed teachers. Where did you take your first training and what was your first training about?
Well, that was my first training with Julian and Hala, right?
Okay,
And
okay,
and it
so
was
it was vinyasa mostly?
it was a Hatha-Vinyasa,
Okay.
right? And then I went from there and took all of Paula's trauma-informed classes and then like trainings. And then I did street yoga, which is no longer in action anymore, which is really a bummer. But they sort of retired their stuff.
I
Uprising yoga.
started with I started with yoga gangsters, which is not around
Mhm.
anymore because that was like a name that it was like, no, we don't use that. I think they're calling it something different now, but yeah,
Yeah.
similar kind of situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Street yoga was doing good stuff. They were working with a lot of unhoused
Mm.
people and they had, Mark Lilly, who founded it, had a lot of really beautiful insights. And so I was sort of moving in that direction and then did a beyond duality class, did and then went to yin and then to restorative, not in that order, and then I got really involved in the accessible yoga.
Yeah, tell me about
um
that. I saw that in your bio. Tell me about the accessible yoga because there's a real anytime I make any kind of chair yoga or adaptive yoga for YouTube, the video does really well. So I know that there's like a real need for that. So tell me about your training and what you've done with
you
that.
know that was a really beautiful training, and it was founded by Jivana Heyman. And the accessible yoga, it's accessibleyoga.org, and you can find out a bunch of information about them, but they're amazing. And at the time, I think it was the first accessible yoga conference when I met
Oh, neat.
Jivana, and I was doing a photo booth. And I was there as a photographer, so I'm doing the photo booth, and I was with Melanie Klein. I think Yoga and Body Image Coalition was doing a presentation, and so it was a YBIC photo booth, and it was kind of fantastic. And photographing lots of people in
Wow.
my homemade booth, and then we ended up taking a training. And at the time, the accessible yoga trainings were 60 hours. They were 2 4-day weekends. They were big trainings. And it was pretty fantastic. And now I think that they're doing them a lot small. They're doing like it's one weekend. It's Friday
Mm.
through Sunday, which is enough to give you the idea. But these were very parsed out at the time.
Yeah, I like
And
the longer trainings too.
I will say that I feel like I was really blessed to be in the earlier training, in the sense that, it's like we really did make dummy beds and practice, in that way. Or, we had a lot of wheelchair bound people in the room, and it was like you could work with, different bodies and with different abilities. And um, it was fantastic learning to work in that way. And
Did you get to meet Matthew Sanford at all?
I did meet Matthew, although I haven't
Yeah.
taken his training and I don't know him particularly well. Um,
He has
but
an incredible story. He has an incredible
he
story.
does, and
Yeah.
he was at that conference as well,
Yeah.
and lots of people were there. It was great. It was a nice piece to be a part of at that conference. Who else was there teaching? Diane Bondi taught a class. Um, I think Ryan, who's lovely, he taught a class. Lots of different people um teaching, and it was just, you could see like, oh, there was a real depth to the practice. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about
Hmm.
it isn't about um getting into a pretzel. It was about like, how can we be present? How can we be grounded? How can we be actually in tune with all 5 layers of ourselves? Right?
Hmm.
Like, can we bring the koshas into the work? Can we bring awareness of the gunas into the work? It's beautiful. And I think I love, it's like Jivana said, if you can breathe, you can do yoga. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
right. And that's been really cool. I mean, when he did the accessible yoga book, I did all the photographs for that. So it's been nice to be there as a teacher and also doing this other piece. And my experience is that my yoga has informed my photography and how I shoot and how I function, and same with my somatic work. It's all sort of
So explain to the listeners what somatic experience is, because I think a lot of people have no idea what that means.
yeah. Somatic experiencing is really freaking cool. It is a bottom-up approach to healing trauma and stress related disorders. It used to be viewed as a very shock trauma focused. The more we know, the more we realize that it's also very akin to working with developmental trauma and medical trauma, things of that nature. It was created by Dr. Peter Levine. And, this has been his life's work to really understand the nervous system. And he was studying animals in the wild, and why are animals that are hunted or hunting not cruising around the Sahara or the rainforest with PTSD.
Mm.
Right? You don't see the lion, in a trauma state. They're just they do their thing, and then there's what are they doing that we're not doing. And through polyvagal theory, which was created by Dr. Stephen Porges, and Peter sort of looking at the brain and where we sort of are in alignment with our animal friends and where human beings are different. And that's really interesting. It's like you look at our domestic animals, right? And people will say, oh, my dog is so anxious. Well, that's because we do that to them, right? Something happens and they go like this and they start to flee, and we go, no, it's okay. And we pet them. We actually interrupt their ability to shake it out and orient and do all the things. And so through Peter's work in tracking the threat response that he sees in animals that have the mammalian brain like we do, and the reptilian brain like we do, the hind brain, going, oh, this is happening for human beings, but we have this funky and cool prefrontal cortex that comes in and goes, you're fine. And we override it. And so what we then have is what, he'll call all this, survival energy that's all dressed up with nowhere to go. And you'll see it in a yoga class. Someone comes in and they're like, they can't close their eyes. They can't sit still. They have to sit by the door. They can't get organized in their own nervous systems, right?
Yeah.
And
made me think of somebody that came to my class with a whole bunch of stuff. He would just come and just put just a tent of stuff around him.
Right, which actually is this management strategy of creating some kind of a boundary, right?
Yeah,
and we function and move through the world in a way that we're not always aware of our activation patterns. And so then we're labeling, oh, I have ADD. Not that people don't have ADD, right? But I have this, I have that, I'm this, I'm that. And we start to sort of almost embody these labels that we've thrust on ourselves or have been thrust on us by others, particularly family of origin. It's a long way that happened. And so then here we are, dysregulated humans, and so through looking at it like that, getting a sense that we can actually slow things down. Our nervous system is on average 6 times slower than the character structure. And that's, if we're in a freeze state or collapse, then it's even slower, 100 times slower. But from this, if you think about it that way, the mind's like, yeah, and the body's like, yo, hey, hold on. And I often will use the example, you're getting ready to go out and your mind is already in the car and your playlist is ready to go and that you've got the temperature setting and you're like, dude, come on. And the body's like, hold your horses. I have to go pee. I got to get my shoes on. Like there's all this other stuff then, right? And so it's like, how do we bridge that so that the mind can go, oh yeah, let's actually take our time, which is why yoga, I think, is a good friend.
So
to
what would
SE.
that look like? Take us through like how you would teach that in a class. What would that look like for someone who is coming to a class
Hmm.
and
I think
have that integrated?
one of the first things I do when I'm teaching is invite people to look around, which is not something that is typical, right? And I'll say, let's give our systems an opportunity to make any necessary changes we have to make. Maybe you're like, I don't want to sit right here. I feel really open, like too vulnerable, right? You'll notice some people will sit very intentionally by a wall and they're not using the wall as the prop. They're using the wall as like a boundary, right? And normalizing this behavior, because there's not, as soon as we say like it's normal to need to know where the door is, it's normal to want to have the back. This is your nervous system letting you know what it needs to feel relatively safe.
Yeah, when I was in that training with Hala, something that she said really changed my whole life. She said, you had a normal reaction to an abnormal situation.
Exactly.
And I remember just being like, wow, yes, finally, somebody that gets me. Like, I went through all this stuff in my, growing up, and to like understand that I wasn't abnormal. There's nothing wrong with me. I did the right thing based on what was going on in my life. And I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Right. And what's available, right? When I hear someone say, oh, I would have kicked his ass, I would have got up and fought back. It's like, you don't know.
You don't know.
That's all happening automatically.
I had somebody break into my house. I had someone break into my house while I was in the house, and my roommate was at her boyfriend's house. And so I was there by myself here in Las Vegas. This was years ago. And I have one of those rods that like you can shove under your door to like block yourself in. So I'm blocked in under my door, hiding out in my room. And I remember like thinking ahead of time, like before this ever happened, like if someone ever broke into my house, I would get my bat and I would show them. And I grew up on a farm, and here I am, like barricaded in my room on the phone with 911, like, they're in the house, like freaking out. But then I'm looking out my back window, and the most PTSD I've ever had in my whole life. We had bed bugs one time. Oh, it was the most awful thing. My roommate, and at the time, her and I still talk about it. Like, just, it was the most, we lost like 75% of our stuff trying to get rid of it. Like, we just had to throw things away. And it was a long time, and it was very expensive. And, anyhow, we had all this stuff in the backyard because we had bed bugs, and we had the house fumigated. So we had all these things in these plastic bags that were airproof, like taped up with duct tape and stuff. And then inside of a plastic bin, sitting out in the sun to try and kill the bed bugs, right? And I had all my camping gear back there in the backyard like this. And I look out in the backyard, and the guy is in the backyard, and he starts to open the bin to get to my camping gear that's like really expensive stuff. And all of a sudden I knocked on the window. I was like, hey. And it's just funny that like that was the moment that I was like, oh, now I can tell him, barricaded in my room. But
but that's what needed to happen, right? Like your system just doesn't know. I'll tell you, like that sounds like such a scary experience.
Some crazy things happen.
No, seriously. Was there a resolution? Did the cops get there?
The police came. And it was just a meth guy who broke into our backyard and got into the house. It just, like, anytime you live in a big city, you're gonna have you're going to have the potential for that kind of stuff. And if you live, I just feel more comfortable with my people. So I've always lived in neighborhoods on the edge, like even
Mhm.
when I started to make more money, I just, this is where I've always lived. And I just
Yeah.
like to live
Yeah.
in those, like I just feel more comfortable here than say like Summerlin or something, like
Yeah.
in the suburbs. I feel a lot happier close to the Las Vegas Strip. And because of that, there's a
Sure.
different element, and so you have to be
Yeah.
more aware, which I am, but it just, there was a time like around that time about 10 years ago when a lot of people before, um there's been a lot of change. I wouldn't say that it's really gotten better in Las Vegas because after marijuana was
Yeah.
legalized, homelessness increased 16%. And then after the closures in 2020,
Mm.
it's absolutely off the charts now.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
hear
it's
that it's,
just more crime and, it's just part
yeah,
of it. It's just part of being on this planet, I guess, really.
it is, but there's also a sort of a nationwide epidemic of houseless, the unhoused, this deep poverty, the wage gap. Um, it's pretty alarming. I think people are walking around in more shaken nervous systems,
Oh,
right?
it's
Like,
the last like 2.5 years have just
yeah.
been collectively some of the
Hmm.
hardest times for us.
Yeah,
And I feel like, are you a fan of Brene Brown?
I am. I like her a lot.
Yeah. So she talks about how we've just been through collective trauma after collective
Hmm.
trauma after collective
Yep.
trauma.
Hmm.
And we're all just like the walking wounded, and
Yeah.
we really, I think, in the last 2.5 years, the campaign to separate and divide us through acting like we're very different has been very
Hmm.
successful and to control
Hmm.
us all that way because we are not different. The Yoga Sutras say that we are all one, we are all part
Mm.
of this planet. And while we have differences of culture, differences of experience, differences of the veil that we see the world through, like Miguel Ruiz
Sure.
talks about in the Four Agreements. Ultimately, we're all human beings. We're all in this together. And the ultimate
Yeah.
answer, in my mind, is love. But we haven't really been generating that. And so I
Well, I
think,
think we're traumatized,
right,
right? And we're
right.
traumatized because I think on one hand, there's the humanness that we all carry. Yeah. And then on the other hand, there's a deep um, vilification of difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I moved through the world in a Jewish body with invisible disability, and I get comments on a regular basis, like more now than I have in a long time. And when I was a kid, I experienced a ton of anti-Semitism, um, where it's like, "What are you?" Right? Oh, you'll be fine. Jews have a lot of money. Things things like that, and I go,
Tell that to my
"Oh."
ex.
I'm like, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. I'll check my bank account, and right. And that's me who also carries this sort of white skin privilege and can move with more ease than some of my friends that cannot. Right. So I think that we need to be really looking at equity and how are we lifting
Yeah.
up, those who don't have as much or those who have been vilified.
Well, if we
So
look at
that,
every person, like the Yoga Sutra says, if we look at every person as just a reflection of us. So
mhm,
when I'm unkind to you, I'm truly being unkind to me.
right.
And then that's where I think
Yeah.
the oneness comes from and the
Sure.
separateness dissipates. But acknowledging that the separateness matters makes
Yeah,
makes it easier to acknowledge that we're the same. If that's, I mean,
exactly.
I know that sounds really weird, but
No, but it does it right. Like if you can see those who have been otherized, right, and begin to humanize, then we can see our separateness and our togetherness at the same time. It makes a lot of sense. It's that,
Yeah.
holding these two truths, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love this. There's I think it's in the Talmud, or it might be a Kabbalistic saying from the rabbis, but that there's 72 faces of God, and if we don't know who they are, this feels very yogic to me, right? And so if we walk through the world and we treat everybody like they're the divine, we're good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how do we move through the world treating people with kindness, with love, with value, with, lifting each other up?
I don't
And
find that when we, how it used to be, our parents would always tell us, treat others as you would like to be treated. I don't find that. I find that I try to treat others as they would like to be treated.
yeah,
So some people don't like my
yeah,
vision of how life should be, or what I think should be the setup, really doesn't matter when I
right,
am engaging with another person and want to be respectful to them. What
sure,
I feel they have an expectation of, and how they view the world
yeah,
as good, right, wrong, bad, whatever, what their needs are, particularly as a yoga teacher that holds space for people.
sure,
Maybe in my
yeah,
everyday circle where it's just my friends at my house, whatever. But
sure,
sometimes when you're working with people and you want to help them find their own healing, it's important to acknowledge the things that are important to them, even if
absolutely,
they don't think, even if I don't think that's important. The idea that someone else thinks it's important now makes
yeah,
it important to me.
right. We're bearing witness. We're
Right.
bearing witness. And I think for me, in working with people who are really holding deep trauma, or teaching yoga in the prison system, or in group homes, or in juvenile halls, or in
Mhm.
middle schools, as the case may be, um, bearing witness.
Well, I know that
And
our time is limited and we could talk forever. I'm really enjoying our conversation, but I want to take a moment to talk about how people can connect with you and how
yeah,
they can work with you if they would like to. And in what ways do you offer services that people can be a part of?
awesome. It has been a really rich conversation. I'm sure we could have a lot longer of a time to talk. um, I can be found on Instagram at Sarit Z Rogers, Saritz Rogers, and also Sarit Photo, also on Instagram. Although I haven't been posting as much there, but and then saritzrogers.com is my website. And within that, you can see sort of how to book a session with me if you want to book an SE session, if you want to know more about somatic experiencing. I am not teaching any public classes at the moment. I'm actually working on building my own trauma-informed accessible yoga training.
Exciting. That's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. So I'm excited about that because I really want to integrate the accessibility in there in a deeper way. Um, so that's cooking. That's currently in the crock pot of my
Will that
brain.
be in person or online or
You
both?
know, I think it's going to have to be both because I feel like
Yeah.
if you're going to, through the lens of accessibility, it's like we want to make this accessible to everybody. And if somebody's bedbound and they want to learn how to do this, they
Yeah.
can. They can. When I was hospitalized with COVID, alone in my room because it was terrible. I was doing yoga in bed, and that was incredibly beneficial for me. And doing like some of the asana, but also some of the eye yoga and some of the just the
Mm.
pranayama and like a lot of stuff I was doing um in bed. So I feel like helping people understand that it is a mobile practice, that we can do this wherever we are. Um, Yeah,
Wherever
I
you
think
are,
that's
there you are.
wherever you are, there you are. Yeah, it's like, how do we meet ourselves with some some compassion, to really sit, allow ourselves to be uncomfortable when it's necessary and allow ourselves to also feel good. And I think from the lens of trauma work, we are really good at feeling like crap. And I think that there's so much power in learning how to feel good, not by bypassing the ugly, but for like the ugly's here and I can also feel good.
Yeah. For
That there's
many years, I
yeah.
traveled around and studied with Sean Corn. Like everywhere she
Mhm.
was, I would go and like be like, I'm in your flower, blah, blah, blah." And for like 20 years. And one of the things that she said to me that really helped me as a person who has experienced trauma is that she said, when you're feeling out of control, when your life is you're feeling upset about something or you're dealing with something, sitting with that emotion instead of having a drink, having a cigarette,
Mhm.
calling up your friend, getting on social media, whatever, reading a book,
Yep.
whatever it is that use as a tool to escape, sitting with that and learning how to just organize it in the mind will be
Mhm.
the way to get through it. And for me, I have really noticed that that has been the way through. That I no longer have to deal with racing thoughts in the way I used to. I no longer
Mhm.
can't go like it used to be. I could only go 10 minutes without being with someone else. I couldn't be alone for longer than 10 minutes, like
Yeah.
learning those coping skills through just sitting through it. Like what's the worst that's going to happen if I just sit there, you know, and learn to control
Well,
my breath and learn to just let the
yep.
emotions come through and learn
Like
how
a
to
wave.
turn it down and turn it up. Yeah.
Yep.
And
I mean,
yeah.
there is that riding the wave, and I often will say to people that we are surfing. We're learning how to move with these emotions as opposed to trying to stop them with drink, drug, whatever. And, I have a ridiculous amount of time sober. I've been sober for most of my life at this point. And so I've had to learn, like, how do you sit with and be with it? And I think,
Mm,
circling back to the question you asked me about how I would bring this into a yoga class, is I might invite also, like, notice how it feels to be in your body right now. Does it feel, what shows up? Does your breath change? Does it deepen? Does it lengthen? Does it get shallow? Are you holding your breath? Can we back off if we are, right? Like, actually learning how to titrate the activation so that if we're sitting in a warrior two and we're taking 10 breaths there, that giving yourself permission to back out and go back in, come out and go back in, instead of like, I can do it. And then all of a sudden you're
mhm.
hurting yourself because you're like, braced against it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things like that, like where we can start to develop the capacity to hold more, right?
Well, there we go, right back into the conversation. And actually, we need to be wrapping up. So you can connect with Sarit at Sarit Z Rogers on Instagram. I will leave all of her links below in the description. Thank you again so much for joining us. The Yoga Celebrity podcast is on basically everything, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts is everywhere. Please do subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. And for everyone, please do share with anyone who might be served by listening to today's podcast. I look forward to seeing you all in the next podcast. Have a great night.
Thank you so much for joining us at the Yoga Celebrity podcast. I can't wait to join you next week for another exciting podcast. If you haven't yet, check out my online 200-hour or 300-hour yoga teacher training. I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening. Mwah! I appreciate you.